It's the 17th of January, 2022. Hope everybody's doing reasonably good on this Blue Monday. It's a Blue Monday. The longest day of winter, I guess, is it? And tonight is the wolf moon. It's the smallest moon of 2022. Emaciated bears, emaciated whales, get you up to speed. Up to 1 million sieverts per hour outside. So there's 4 reactor buildings that detonated in Japan. Official story is 3, but obviously I'll show you there's going to be 4. At the top of each of the buildings was decades of reactor cores, and these buildings were the biggest in the world, reactors. Chernobyl was 200 tons. These are 800 tons, but they're 800 tons of pure uranium and pure plutonium. Whereas Chernobyl was mostly graphite, like Windscale / Sellafield in the United Kingdom. Don't get me wrong, they were horrific events, but they don't hold a candle to Fukushima. 1 million sieverts outside of reactor 1. So you remember at Chernobyl, they sent in 600,000 people? Ain't nobody going near that. That's a whole different planet system, a solar system. Unit 2, reactor building completely liquefied the reactor cores. They never seen that in the history of nuclear before. And this is reactor 2, a comparison of reactor 3. Reactor 2, I got the wrong picture that I could have used, but reactor 3 also detonated, and it's just a stub of it left. These were all 190-foot reactor buildings, the biggest in the world at the time, with decades of reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings, and a complete loss of containment, which is a big deal because Japan government has said if a Fukushima containment vessel was damaged, Tokyo would be voluntarily evacuated. And this is your containment here, the blue can't remember the proper name for that, red. So there's at the top of the buildings there are 2 fuel pools, one there and one over there. Now, this is the official picture of a building that don't exist. In other words, they faked the pool in reactor 3. And this is them claiming they're on top of the building. So that's 3 reactors. So then there's the 4th reactor. All of them lost their fuel pools, which is decades of reactor cores. There's about 100 Chernobyls in each of the top of each building. But it's because it's a meltdown on a whole different scale, and they use salt water on it, and it's right by the ocean. These are incredibly bad case for this planet. Doomsday-like radiation released a fire in the pool at Unit 4. It would be a global catastrophe. That's what's left of reactor 4, but they're pretending it looks like that. And then they're blaming all the die-offs in species on global warming and in humans on the coronavirus. Food supplies being killed off. So I got to build you a picture of how Fukushima is the culprit first, and then we go through the cycle of around 800 clicks. That's 1 click. Click is 2, 3. Food supplies being killed off. It's not just sea creatures, but they're very dramatic when you see the sea creatures die off, because they don't die off in the forest; they float up on the beaches. Many sea creatures affected. Most whales we've tracked for the past 2 years not doing well. And cesium remains dispersed throughout the water columns from the surface to the ocean floor. That's Reuters, by the way. Cesium now, of course, is not just cesium. That's the cover story also for Radioactive Folly, where they only talk about cesium. The biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods are curium isotopes. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker for the curium isotopes than you do for plutonium isotopes. And the reactors run on plutonium uranium, not cesium. So cesium remains dispersed throughout the water column from the surface to the ocean floor. That's 2012. I mean, you're talking about for thousands of years and millions of years. Radioactive sea spray, by the way, has been shown to blow hundreds of kilometers inland. And what that also is, so even if you didn't have the airborne radioactive fallout plumes, we'll cover a lot of that coming up. And so this is a model of one of the radioactive fallout plumes from Japan, covering. Now the models are only based on venting; they're not based on the actual buildings I showed you and the inventory that would have been in those buildings. Fukushima melted fuels drifting in the ocean on the land, lacking containment, ends up on the coastline, blows into communities. People get an exceptional dose, and the harm goes on for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. And then, like the insects within 200 miles of the coastline are acclimated to more salt in their diet because of the ocean spray, right? So they know that for 200 kilometers on coastlines around the world, you have a pH difference because of the salt being liberated from the ocean, and it shows up at least 200 kilometers inland. It actually goes further than that too, but the study was showing that, radiation is liberated through that same vector as salt, same kind of scenario. So this goes on for a very long time, and you see the New York Times, ocean life faces mass extinction. And a study says we may be on the precipice of a major extinction event in marine wildlife. Okay, so let me connect everything, why radiation, with academic studies for just a little tiny bit, from Chernobyl, to help you appreciate how this plays out. Let me give you one more model. And so gas, oil, coal emissions don't circle the planet, pulsing energy at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, every second for millions of years. And coal, gas, and oil emissions, carbon, so-called carbon, can't heat up the planet. Radioactive fallout from 75 years of weapons production is your actual culprit. So you got radioactive fallout, circles around the planet, but gas, oil, and coal emissions don't do that. They don't make plumes like this. Here's some studies. So instead of, these are all human studies, or most of them. Some are on the Lapia reindeer, but just think of all of these studies on insects, or humans, or animals, or mammals, because when you see a study based on a large population of humans, the same is going to be true in the animals that are in the same continent. Influence of post-Chernobyl fallout on birth defects and abortion rates in Austria. So that's going to be true for animals and birds and mammals and fish and everything else. The influence of the trends in sex odds, human sex odds, but I think this has to be true for animals and birds and insects too every time. So trends in the human sex odds at birth in Europe and the Chernobyl nuclear plant. So Chernobyl wasn't limited to 30 square kilometers like they want you to believe, as these studies will show you. Chernobyl prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. That's going to be the same for the animal kingdom. It stops producing babies. Secondary sex ratio and trends. And what that actually, I forgot to mention what that means. This changes the ratio of males to females. So there's less babies being born because there's always more males. And in order to cause that in Europe, and to cause that meant you poisoned all the population of Europe in order to get a statistical odd that was able to be perceived by research, which meant that there was a cause and effect, right? So more males than females, so less females means less babies. That's true for the animals and mammals and everything else, right? It's not just the humans in all of Europe. And you see these adverse effects that are going to be true for all the species too, like we're going to talk about tonight. Secondary sex ratio and trends in associated Pacific births near nuclear facilities in France and Germany is a discrepancy of males to females. There's always more males than females after they're exposed to ionizing radiation, anthropogenic man-made ionizing radiation. Researchers say massive decline of fish is thrown off the ecosystem. And as I showed you earlier, radiation is suspended from the surface to the ocean floor, right? So the fish will stop having babies. This happens in increments over generations. And in these species, that could be 6 months or a year or 2 years. But now we're many generations down the road, and then we see a complete failure of these species because a lot of them will stop producing. But the adults will live for 10 or 12 years, so they're still out there, right? Researchers and whales, of course, live to be 100 years old. But what happens is they get leukemia and they show up emaciated. Researchers say a massive decline of fish is thrown off the ecosystem. The population has collapsed. They're gone virtually everywhere. Whales, numbers drop significantly. Squid disappearing. And of course, the squid are super important for a lot of whale species like the covert, beak whales and stuff like that. And pothead whales and pilot whales, they love squid. Other major die-offs seen, non-thyroid cancers in northern Ukraine, fallout from the accident, overall cancer incidences in Finland, but there's 1,800 other illnesses will manifest before cancer. Cancer is usually latent. So this is true for all the species too. Down syndrome, time clustering, so the babies are born deformed and unable to function. Of course, in the ocean, that means you're going to get eaten by other fish quite quickly. Decrease of population. Non-thyroid cancer incidences in Belarus, residents exposed to Chernobyl. Fallout in childhood and adolescence. Chernobyl fallout in prenatal mortality in the United Kingdom because they closed 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland, United Kingdom, which meant all their fresh water supplies were incredibly radioactive. Former U.S. government, the elephant in the room is Fukushima radiation when it comes to the Pacific Ocean die-off. And what I'm showing you is how that actually works with academic studies applied to humans, but is easy to reapply them to other species because nobody's safe from this stuff. Chromosome aberrations, Norwegian reindeers following the Chernobyl accident. Assessments of the influence of Chernobyl and birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. Legal abortions in Sweden. Radiation, human gender proportions at birth. Again, you see a lot of literature about more males than females. There is no safe level of radionuclides exposure. And of course, animals and insects and birds are much more vulnerable than humans. We're at the top of the food chain. Legally induced abortions in Denmark. So you can see Chernobyl wasn't just segregated to an exclusion zone. Pregnancy outcome in Finland after Chernobyl, in Norway after Chernobyl, and early infant mortality in Germany after Chernobyl. U.S. is receiving a steady flow of radiation from Chernobyl, Fox News. This was 19 days later, this part of the model right here. So that's the Pacific, that's the Atlantic, that's America. I mean, you are buried in an invisible snowstorm of radiation that you can't see it or hear it or taste it or touch it or pick it up. Trends in birth and birth sex ratio in the vicinity of just research reactors, which are supposed to be, they're very low energy reactors. They're nowhere near like a normal nuclear power plant, but yet they influence the sex ratio of males and females in the community, the radioactive fallout. And the same thing in France. So it's also going to be the same thing in animals and insects and birds and mammals and animals. Global implication of Chernobyl. So all of these attributes I already showed you are applicable, according to the studies, globally. And potential for disease initiation by inhaling beta-emitter nuclear particles and alpha and gamma and neutrons. But that one particularly is beta. And all kinds of problems: heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. The list just keeps going. There's 1,800 illnesses and diseases. Plutonium evaporated and spread around as gas after Fukushima nuclear meltdowns. This is actually a plutonium model from TEPCO's numbers. Pulsing energy at the speed of light all around the planet. Yay, nuclear is so much fun. Infant mortality after Chernobyl. And in the blue is the people that had done the study. Pregnancy outcome in Sweden after Chernobyl. We're almost through the Chernobyl part. Effects on the accident on Chernobyl atomic energy plant on the outcome of pregnancies. Dental abnormalities in people living in radionuclide contaminated areas. Abnormal retinal pigment because of Chernobyl radioactive fallout. Effects on radiation on the reproductive systems. It's not just going to be humans, see? Prenatal irradiation-induced brain, neuropathological, and cognitive impairments. Human sex ratio at birth after atmospheric testing. It changed the sex ratio atmospheric testing worldwide. Poisoned by this death cult, this hateful, despicable coward. It's a coward industry on top of that, the people in the nuclear industry. They're incredible cowards. Fukushima radioactive fallout is global warming. Pulsing energy at the speed of light, covering the entire planet. That model is only based on 20 days to 31st of March. If you let the model run for another 10 days, the rest of the planet is covered in radioactive fallout. Nobody even talks about Fukushima anymore. There's almost no fish. The ocean is dying. It's terrifying. Government warns public expect alarming increases in deaths on the west coast. Fish are just too hard to find. We are preparing for the worst. Alarming signs of ocean distress. Bags of skins and bones. Record number of stranded seal pups. In the 40 years of history, they've never seen this many animals. Record number of deaths declared an unusual mortality event by the government. Babies being found severely emaciated. Sick and starving animals, a mystery to experts. Possible health effects from Fukushima radiation. So yeah, the radioactive fallout covered all of those places. The whole planet non-stop. Very sick, very emaciated. Mind-blowing die-offs of seabirds underway. Every bird was seen is starving to death. Severe babies being found severely emaciated. Countless dead birds reported in the Pacific. There's no seals present. Nothing will eat the dead bodies. All of them are starving. Animals acting weird, sick, weak, too weak to fly, to run. They want to know if it's Fukushima. All of them are starving. And this is catastrophic radioactive fallout that they've been hiding from the population for a decade. It's disgusting what the nuclear industry is trying to exterminate everybody and everything on the planet through nuclear power plants. Alarms raised on the west coast over unprecedented die-offs. Carts filled with emaciated dead bodies, animals sick, starving, emaciated, sardines, crayfish disappeared from the Pacific Ocean. They vanished. The food chain got broken, right? Marine mammals starving. Experts like walking skeletons, extremely emaciated. All the stories have these one things in common: emaciated animals of all species. Marine birds disappearing in the Pacific. Record number of seals and sea lions starving to death. Owls hemorrhaging, very poor conditions, extremely or badly emaciated. We're almost through it. Starving, 100% death rate of baby seals on the California coast, extremely thin. All sorts of illnesses, infections, milkless moms. So there's been an overwhelming amount of documentation going on. Alarm over very sick animals washing ashore in Alaska, bleeding from the face, bloody entrails. We are very much aware of the possibility of radiation from Fukushima. Ongoing fish famine, the dearth of food across the ocean. Looking grim, hard to watch. And I've done research expeditions up and down the coastline year after year. And documenting, I'm going to show you a little tiny bit of that. Whales won't stop killing themselves in New Zealand. Whales won't stop killing themselves in New Zealand. Oh, amazing headline. 51 pilot whales died Friday. Now, I'm doing a recap, so I'm not going to try to go through all the details. I'm just going to hit on the important ones. You're talking about strandings across the entire breadth of New Zealand in a very short period of time. So people like to say, oh, the pilot whales, they'll follow each other up on the beaches. Remember that for what's coming up. This is the whole coastline of New Zealand we're talking about in just 48 hours. More than 400 whales beached themselves in New Zealand's. 200 whales stranded themselves in New Zealand's refloated. New Zealand just experienced its largest whale. More than 600 pilot whales washed ashore in New Zealand over the past 2 days. And you're talking about strandings across the entire breadth of New Zealand in a 48-hour period. But you have, it's not just pilot whales. You have unusual mortality events for the minke whales, unusual mortality events for the grey whales. Over 7,000 in the last 5 years have shown up dead, and the majority of them were emaciated. Unusual humpback mortality events showing up all over the coastline under migratory routes, emaciated. North Atlantic right whales, unusual mortality events. The killer whales endangered because they're dying from starvation or leukemia. Whales get leukemia too. Matriarchs of well-known orca families starving to death. Another southern resident killer whale and her calf found starving to death, emaciated, with the peanut head, where the head is concaved in. Alaska seabirds, and I'm still trying to build you a picture of what's been happening. We're almost through that. Have been found emaciated and starved. Over 1 million common murres who dive 600 feet for a living all day long and feed on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill and small feeder fish like that. Officials recorded deaths of fork-tailed storm petrels, fulmars, shearwaters, kittiwaks, auklets, over 1 million Cassini auklets, and puffins, all with one thing in common: emaciated. On land, the salmon are not showing up, so they say that's why the bears are emaciated. But bears' diet is mostly grubs and roots and berries and grass. The salmon failed too, obviously, and they tried to cover up what's happening by talking about the emaciated bears showing up everywhere. And grizzly bears also eat moose and elk and deer and anything else they can catch. Not just berries, not just sockeye, right? Hard cases. So you got the killer whales. They claim up in Puget Sound are emaciated because they haven't got sockeye. The bears are emaciated because they haven't got sockeye. It's a disgusting industry, the nuclear industry, and it has deep reaches into every facet of the government at this stage. Mysterious mass deaths of Alaska seabirds. baffles scientists. Tens of thousands of dead birds washing up on beaches. Pre-Fukushima, the odds of finding 2 dead birds on the same beach was unheard of. The birds, all of the species known as the common murres, appear to be starved to death. We know they're starving, their stomachs are empty. They appear emaciated. 10 sperm whales also wash up on a beach, say, at the same time. It's not just pilot whales, all the species. Alaska adds krill and mussels to the list of... They're gone off the whole coastline of British Columbia, the mussels are. Except for little tiny baby ones that keep showing up. It's the same thing with the barnacles. That's the only thing left on any rocks is little itty-bitty barnacles. Bikini, now think about this legacy of nuclear for a minute before we jump into it. Bikini Atoll, they say 1,000 times the radiation of Chernobyl. Bikini Atoll radiated over 1 million square kilometers. Radioactive fallout from the testing contaminated a huge swath of land and ocean, extending over 1 million square kilometers and severely impacted the habitability of the affected atolls. 1 million square kilometers. And the United Kingdom done the same thing. France done the same thing. China, India, Pakistan. Okay, so you got everybody. The industry is using media as a weapon, right? And they create these so-called justice warriors. And one of them found a dolphin on a beach. And what they done was they stuck a 2-foot faucet from a boat down the throat of the dolphin, because the dolphin's not going to eat that. A dolphin's not stupid and going to eat a faucet, right? But that was the official story that came out, that the dolphin, plastic shower hose pulled from a dead dolphin's stomach. It was the second one that died on that beach in a month, by the way. And the other one, they shoved down some plastic into its stomach. But an animal won't eat plastic. It doesn't work that way. It chases its food. It doesn't look for food, for something floating along, go up and sniff it. Okay. So, after Fukushima, there was a real map from NOAA. It was this one here, of the radioactive dispersal into the Pacific Ocean. NOAA also had a tsunami map. And so the nuclear industry started pumping out that picture over there and pretending it was this one. And when people fell for it, they called them idiots. Because the ocean currents are real, right? But the ocean current is actually real. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to have an audio there that time. Caught me off guard. And you too, I'm sure. So the Pacific Ocean model, for instance, existed way back.
Maybe worse than thought. Studies from last year indicate that radioactive water will contaminate the entire Pacific Ocean in just 6 years. Kim Min-ji reports.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German marine research institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
In just 6 years. I don't know why my Geiger counter's not working. I'll just play that one more time.
Maybe worse than thought. Studies from last year indicate that radioactive water will contaminate the entire Pacific Ocean in just 6 years. Kim Min-ji reports.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German marine research institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years. In Japan, the simulation...
So that heats up the ocean because it's pulsing energy every second. So they showed you the fake map, but wouldn't show you the real one. celebrated physician, Fukushima has humanity on the brink of a possible worldwide nuclear holocaust. And this is how it plays out in radioactive fallout. Here's a better model from France of Fukushima's radioactive fallout. This model is based on 16 days. And so after 16 days, the entire Pacific, the continents, the planet, the Atlantic, the Indian Oceans are all covered in radioactive fallout. And they'll try to talk about cesium, but remember, cesium has all kinds of daughter isotopes, but reactors are mostly curium when they melt down, which is the top one. And you'll see a lot of americium and, of course, uranium. Baby sharks are born scrawny and sick because of climate change. Or because of Fukushima. Because of Fukushima. So this is Vancouver, British Columbia. The Arls are expeditions where I went in and done research year after year. Just to try to get you up there. We're almost to... Okay, and that's the operation.
We're almost to Egg Island up there. Seas are definitely building. It's Monday, the 15th. Fog is so thick you can't see a bloody thing. One of my tow lines is snapped. Still hanging on by a big wave now between me and the skiff, and I'll break that one. That's the tow rope for the Zodiac. And see how the braid actually started to come undone, but stayed together. 4.3 miles per hour, back and forth, 3.9 knots, 4.6 miles per hour, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there's Calvert Island. The bottom of it, we're inside, no ground swells now, or they're calming down. We got the big sail up. We got the mainsail up. I have to straighten up this one because it's taking
anyway,
some of the wind.
You get the idea, right? And so we've done research expeditions year after year. That's the drone. And then, of course, that's the drone. And the drone, you can see the salmon, some salmon. So the drone is excellent because normally you can't see that stuff, right? And so I went all over the coastline, and you can fill the coastline up with people, but you're not going to find the species that are supposed to be there. And that's to your left is what it should look like. That's pre-Fukushima on the right, in the exact same spot as post-Fukushima. It's the same here. And all of these pictures, the species now are permanently exterminated to the left. So when the birds are coming along the coastline, normally they can just go down to the tide zone area, high or low tide, and dive down and get themselves a feed, right? But they can't. And this is up by Alaska. I'm taking Zoe in on the beach so she can have a leak. She passed away a couple of years ago when we were out looking for birds. She stroked out, which is where she was the best spot that can happen to her. Yeah. She was 15 years old. But she liked to do a face plant on every beach. She would never wait for me to help her. Yeah. Just go do a face plant. As soon as she got close enough to dive. Didn't matter if you hung on to her, she'd just end up going straight into the water to get away from you. So all of those species are permanently exterminated. You'll never take these pictures again. They're now permanently gone, those species, because of Fukushima radioactive fallout. So that's what you call an extinction event, when it wipes out all these species permanently. They're eradicated now. You'll never get the pictures to your left again. And this is a fallout disposition of just a xenon 133 coming out of Japan to your right. That's the Pacific Ocean to your left. It's now hitting America, Canada, Alaska, all the Pacific countries. And the model stops after, that's on the 25th of March, is it? Or 23rd of March, 24th of March, 25th. And so this is 16 days after the tsunami, 17 days. So 17 days, if you let the model run, the whole planet disappears, because that's only 17 days of the model. The radiation doesn't stop there, the model did. All those species are now permanently exterminated. Thank you, Fukushima. Deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world. It does that with radioactive fallout. You'll never take the pictures to your left. Now, I've done the research expeditions year after year. The species never came back. The species never came back. Washed up on the rocks in a hurricane that night, 3 o'clock in the morning. Spiders bioconcentrate radioactivity silver at 1,000 times the level in the soil. And that's what I've been looking for in 2021 and 2020 was spiders and birds and everything else, but spiders. Because normally in spider webs you can find all kinds of insects that are indigenous to the area. And so it's a quick way to determine what species are in that area. Last year we found, and there should be like 500,000 per acre, 160 per square meter in the forest. There was none. West Coast gray whale population, and we'll do that again in the spring. West Coast population of gray whales plummeted by thousands since 2016. The new number was over 7,000 since gray whales emaciated. And in the last couple of years, you start trying to blame everything on ship strikes. Fukushima plume model shows 1 million becquerels over the west coast after the reactor exploded. Resulting destruction takes half the planet with it by radioactive fallout. Rain with 20 million particles of radioactive iodine-131 per liter fell on the U.S. The problem with 131 and that kind of number is your thyroid takes it and converts it into hormones, and you have radioactive hormones that are distributed to all your functional organs and glands throughout your entire body and everywhere else, carried throughout your blood system, right? And so this is the worst thing that can happen to you, is be saturated with iodines. Unfortunately, it was even worse. Nuclear engineer. I agree Fukushima can be an extinction event. You know why nuclear engineer says that? Because he knows that radioactive fallout looks like that. Covers the whole planet immediately. West Coast hit with 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129 in the rain. This was an Ottawa, Canada study from the capital of Canada, Ottawa. And 220 million atoms of iodine-129 per liter goes into the thyroid gland. You have a radioactive hormone on a number that's unimaginable. So you have iodine 131 with 20 million particles per liter of rainfall. And in that same liter, you got another 220 million atoms of the iodine-131 per liter. And then that one you still got 450,000 per square meter of the xenon 133. The huge numbers we're talking about. And this is worldwide we're talking about. Okay, so nuclear activists to be constantly spied upon. And I don't know why my camera didn't done that to me again. I'll jump up and try it one more time. That's pretty weird. We never had that problem before. Experts agree many species of wildlife and fisheries are endangered globally due to Fukushima radioactive fallout. Human civilization may destroy itself. I mean, look at Fukushima. Nobel Prize winner, the only way to preserve human life is to completely turn away from nuclear power. Major U.S. paper telling to quit nuclear power altogether threatens the very existence of human civilization. Well, you can't do that without threatening all the other species, right? Once a nuclear accident occurred, everything is over. Zero prospects of ever restoring the fishing grounds. It's no exaggeration to say the fate of Japan and the world depends on Reactor 4. As I showed you at the beginning, Reactor 4 was actually gone. So you have all these people warning you, and then you have the incredible cover-up going on. Here we go. Ooh, let me get this sorted out first. Just in case somebody's trying to run my stream, there's something I got to do first. Is I got to go in. And let it. I'll show you in a second. Here we go. Allow embedding. Click. And we'll save that. Because every time I go live, Google turns that off. And away we go. Hi, everybody. We got a poll. Should nuclear industry be banned considering Fukushima's radioactive fallout worldwide mass die-off? And we got 26 votes. Here we go. Let's jump into the story. The headlines. 5 melonhead whales wash up on a remote island. Cause of death is unknown. Now, we're not going to try to cover this in great detail. What we're doing is we're putting this back on the internet. Google took down my site with 24,000 subscribers with no strikes, no warning, no emails, and no explanation. They just disappeared me. I asked them to reinstate my channel and no reply. So this is out in the middle of nowhere up by Somalia, and it's an incredible atoll in the middle of nowhere. I'm surprised he didn't blow it up. The nuclear industry didn't blow it up back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. That's a bit of a miracle. They have like 96,000 people out there, but let's keep her rolling here. Rolling. And so sometimes, because of the formats, I'll go this instead. Mystery is 160 melonhead whales wash up on Japanese beaches. Mystery. Ground Zero is a mystery. No, it's not a mystery. There's no mystery there because it's in Japan. Bear eats a 16-year-old after attacking a tourist group in Russia. The adult tourist survives after stabbing the beast in the neck with a penknife and playing dead. Well, it wasn't a beast. It was an emaciated grizzly bear. It was severely emaciated. So they eat around 200,000 berries a day or something. And, of course, berries are one of the, like mushrooms, they really aggregate a lot of radiation. And so it died of leukemia. Because, like, the bear didn't run out of berries. It didn't run out of grubs. It didn't run out of grass. It didn't run out of roots. You know what I mean? It consumed so much of its regular diet that it got leukemia and it couldn't uptake any nutrition anymore. And it went looking for meat as an instinct, probably. Starving bear shot dead. Now, the bear shouldn't have starved because they got berries and grass and grubs and roots, right? Which is 96% of its diet. But we're seeing this all over the place is the problem, right? It's not just isolated incidents. People are urged to stay away from dead whales due to health risk after washed up on the coastlines. Her Majesty's Coast Guard, Her Majesty's Penitentiaries, Her Majesty's... Anyone found interfering with the body, they can face criminal proceedings. So it's owned by the dead whale is owned by the receiver of wrecks, which is the Queen. Whales are royal fish and the property of the receiver of the wreck, which is the Queen, right? So if they get $1 million worth of vomit from it, that goes to the Queen. Why are so many whales dying on California beaches? It's called Fukushima, stupid. And you can see how emaciated this one is. A male 7 gray whale carcasses land on the beach. 6 other stranded whales discovered in April. Whales seem to be dying farther out in the water and sinking, so the true number of deaths isn't clear. And we know that for every whale that washes up, there's another 10 whales can die offshore and never be seen. And the total population of the species along the coast dropped by more than 7,000 since, which is a quarter of the population since 2016. So they're trying to claim since 2016, ship strikes have killed a quarter of the population. Most of the media. This one is actually not going that route, it's just talking about the numbers. But as we show, the species are starving and emaciated. And if some of them are floating, and which means some of them are going to get hit by ships. Climate change, which is what they're blaming it on, which is just, how come not cop pulls you over, why are you speeding? You know, climate change, man. How come your favorite team didn't win in sports? Because of climate change, Dana. Of course. Fukushima radioactive fallout is climate change. It's pulsing energy every second, heats up the planet. Whales are now skinnier than they should be. Seals not to blame for waning Newfoundland cod stocks. In fact, all of the expeditions I've done off the coast there is, I only seen one seal. But some people think the fish are disappeared because they're seals, right? And back in the 90s, used to be 14 million seals off the coast, and there was still tons of fish. Seals not to blame for the species. And so last year, we had millions and millions of songbirds and other species showing up emaciated. And this was another one where they were shown up blind and crusty mouths, beaks. Mystery illness is killing songbirds in 8, 9, 10 states. They reported in 27 Pennsylvania counties, you know, where 3 Mile Island is, as well as in Delaware and 8 other states, and Washington, which has Hanford. And the illness is killing a range of species, not just one. And the disorder is marked by swollen eyes with crusty discharges, erratic flights, and stumbling. There's radiation sickness. Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Indiana, Ohio, Florida. And the birds were being tested for several toxins, parasites, bacterial diseases, viral infections. To date, the test results have been inconclusive. In fact, if they had either one of those showed up in a single test, that would have been the official statement. Instead, they have So you got all kinds of species: the European starling, blue jays, common grackles, American robins, northern cardinals, house finches, house sparrows, eastern bluebirds, red-bellied woodpeckers. There was 190 species. Most of these, by the way, were insect-eating species, and they showed up emaciated. And we'll cover that, I'm sure, later on with the two Danas. 8 and counting Vernon's herons dying from heat. And so Fukushima fallout is causing global warming, right? Causing the heat. It's killing the bacteria in the forest. So the insects can't live in harmony there anymore, and the trees don't break down. So when you have forest fires now, you have much more litter than you normally would expect to have in a cycle. You have birds dying from extreme heat events. This is something we've seen exasperated 100-fold since Fukushima happened. But you can trace it all the way back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you look at the last 75 years, you'll see correlations of all the nuclear testing, nuclear meltdowns, nuclear dumping, releasing this stuff in the environment. It's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. And it was such a large volume released all day just from the fuel pools worldwide. No containment. The reactor cores and the fuel pools are still splitting the atom that powered 1 million homes each. State confirms the number of dead songbirds are soaring, and they call it a disease, but they're not able to articulate it or show us a picture or, from microscopes and that. States now confirms the number of counties with dead songbirds has more than doubled since Friday. So we've seen this acceleration. We started following it. Kentucky, Illinois, all over the place. 1,200 reports to the portal. 200 of those believed to be related to the sick and dying songbirds. Double the reports of the week before. Tense moment is and once again, we're not trying to cover each story individually. We're just doing a recap from 2021. So this documentation exists online again. Tense moments for families as orcas pushes and spins boat. That's now they could have been just scratching, who knows. They become acclimated to boats because everybody gets excited about the orcas and will stop their boat and get pictures, right? But also, the orca could be perceived as, the orca perceives it as competition for scarce food. But because it wasn't physically hammering the boat, it was just like scratching itself on the boat. I don't know for sure. I wasn't there. But British yacht crews feared they would sink and drown as 30 killer whales attacked the boat. Now, if 30 killer whales actually attacked the boat, they would have sunk the boat. And this is from the Mirror, from the United Kingdom, so it's basically worthless. The story exists on other platforms, but when the United Kingdom, any media in the United Kingdom reports on a story, they're gross. That's the only way to describe the United Kingdom media. They're actually just gross, despicable people. Creatures, really. Canada announces big cuts to commercial fishing to protect the wild salmon that Washington orcas eat. Again, this is where they're talking about the killer whales, love sockeye salmon down in Puget Sound. And they would rather go on a hunger strike and starve themselves to death than eat anything else. Right? So no matter what your instinct is, you must know lots of people in your life that only ate pizzas, only ate French fries for a decade. And they don't get French fries, guess what? They'll eat something else. So will whales. And if you look up what does a killer whale eat, it actually eats around 360 different species. So why would it let itself become emaciated rather than eat something else like a halibut or an octopus or a seal or a sea lion or a dolphin, which is they're killer whales. It's impossible to think they went on a hunger strike is all I'm saying. So Canada has taken back fishing licenses, buying them off from salmon in order to allegedly, right, so what they're using the death of the whales, which are dying from leukemia, as a catalyst to get licenses back so fishermen don't start making a big noise about all the fish disappearing. Death by design, how the National Park Service experiments on tool elks. They actually isolate them in a bad place where there's only poisonous plants. Learned that hundreds of the tool elks inside the preserve are dying in agony from starvation, thirst, and eating poisonous plants. They're trapped in an ecological hellscape operated by a bureaucracy that fences the animals away from forage and water for political reasons. Right, so there's a disconnect, right? There's a disconnect in the National Park Services. There's a bit of a disconnect going on there because the farmers are calling the animals pests. So they just lock them away, let them starve to death, or even worse. 12 pilot whales beach in eastern China, 3 have died. And these stories, once again, we're just doing a recap of 2021. And this is part 2 of, I'm not sure, there's not a lot of parts, just because we basically cream the crop for each month. About 150 people taking part in rescue efforts. And they built shelters from the sun for them. That's amazing. They could live for 45 to 60 years. Well, not anymore, but they could at one time. And that's the same story. 9 melonhead whales. Don't ask me because I don't know. Minke whale found dead in Rhode Island. Now, a lot of whales died in Rhode Island, yeah? There's a lot of dead whales up there this year, or the last 7-8 years in particular. From Mystic Aquariums. Why is an aquarium, and we see this all the time, where the aquariums respond to the dead animals, or museums even will respond to the dead animals, or even worse, non-profit organizations set up to control opposition will show up. And Ireland is one, and the United Kingdoms are 2 of the worst spots for that, and Australia, and New Zealand, by the way. Animal rescue program in the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management arrived at the site while the whale was spotted and pronounced dead. Definitely due to the impact of humans and climate change. And seems like everybody's programmed just to regurgitate the words climate change. It's like they're incapable of critical thinking skills. Pygmy sperm whale washes ashore in Surfside Beach. Severely emaciated, by the way. They're completely dependent upon their mother at that age, right? The whale appeared thin. No, that's thin. Right, that's 100% thin. Thin. So you should not typically see them on the coastlines. 2 whales beached in Rocky Point last week caused concern. And you can tell he's emaciated. So they found, there was actually 2 different whales. It is absolutely unusual. Same week, 2 whales, non-regular season. So they're at a season and they're emaciated. And they say in good health. Which, right, and so we noticed this, eventually they start saying the whales are not emaciated in the headlines. Looks like they ate recently, stuff like that. So the whale can, traveled 6,000 miles without eating. Then it eats some squid. Now it died because it's emaciated, because it traveled all that distance, couldn't find any food. It found some food, but it went from 12 inches of blubber down to 2 or 3 inches of blubber and died, right? A lot of people are not aware of the nuances. Beached baby orca sparks a New Zealand whale hunt. I think they spent like $160,000 on this baby orca. Like they'll sacrifice everybody's oldest child for an orca, I notice, on this planet. I have an orca tattoo. He said, I grew up watching Free Willy. I actually had to go get a shower because I got sick after I read that one. Mystery of 3 whales found dead on Moray Beach. 3 whales. And the odds of finding 2 whales on the same beach was better chances of getting hit by a Soviet satellite. In juveniles, there was no plastic was found in their body. No plastic in their body. You see what I mean? They're programmed to blame it on tin cans or pop bottles or plastic, right? They're programmed to look that way first. Well, further tests are done by the Scottish Marine Animal Stranding Scheme. It's a scheme, all right. We've covered them many times, and I disrespect them. The Scum Marine Animal Stranding Scheme had to remit to examine incidents to determine underlying cause and the direct or indirect role humans played. It had to be one. It couldn't be neither. It had to be one of them, see? They are deep diving species, so they're sensitive to underwater noises. Or they could have picked up some sort of infection. We don't know. Could have been an alien trying to give them an anal exam. Could have been anything, Dana. Yeah, and they were emaciated. Young fin whale washes up dead. We see a lot of that. Young, a juvenile. Well, that wasn't normal pre-Fukushima. Coast Guard called after whale was found dead. Coast Guard. Sperm whale. We've seen a lot of sperm whales die in the last couple of years. Up to 10 at a time, washing up on the beaches, emaciated. Harassers of orcas could not pothead whales or pilot whales or mink whales or blue whales or fin whales, but orcas. Gets $1 million fine. I know somebody just got a $45,000 fine out there. Drifting too close to him, apparently. Up to $1 million and 18 months in jail for getting too close to a whale. You know they're going to disappear soon at this rate. Warn boaters, drone pilots, paddle boarders keep their distance from the whales. And blaming it on you, see? And blaming Chinook salmon as a primary source of food. Like it's like anything else. If you got to eat, you go eat. No vessel can come within 400 meters or get a $5 up to $1 million kick in the teeth. Impossible world's first a pair of white orcas are seen off Hokkaido, which is Japan. Yeah, a pair of white orcas in one pod, 2. And it had to be Japan, of course. There it is there. That is amazing, see? That is unbelievable. So 2 white orcas, not babies either. That is amazing. We're seeing more orcas than usual this year. May be unprecedented in the world. As far as I know, it's definitely unprecedented. We've never seen anything like that. Killer whale stranded on the BC coast. Rescued. And they're really good at chasing seals up on the beach and grabbing them and getting back into the water. So for them to end up, now there's an 18, 20-foot tide exchange up there you're talking about, is irrelevant, right? Because orcas that's their environment. NOAA which is a U.S. federal agency responsible for marine conservation. And from what we covered about NOAA, they're completely out of control. It's just they hired so many inbreeds now, it's completely dysfunctional. Threatened biodiversities, what can we do about the decline of insects? In fact, we covered this one story there this summer. We were talking about caterpillars. Right, this was an academic who wrote an article in a major science media. And he said, one of the big problems we got is we got caterpillars are eating plants and then they're pooping out the poop, and that's causing climate change. And you're like, wait a second, we got to get rid of all the insects because they're causing climate change. And that'll come up eventually in these in the recaps, right? Insects are our livelihood. Without insects, we all disappear anyway. And guess what? They're disappearing. Some plants are in decline. There's a decline in insectivorous birds. They all need the bugs. A lot of people see it. Well, insect-eating birds are disappearing because they're showing up emaciated everywhere. There's only beneficial insects and parasites, but insects are our livelihood. We depend on nature. Banned all pesticides in UK gardens to save bees and insects, which is, I agree 100%, but there's more to the story. They're not. I'll show you. A petition calls for outlawing use of chemicals, which is fantastic. A leading insect inspector or expert has called for United Kingdom-wide ban on the use of pesticides in garden, urban areas to protect bees, wildlife, and human health. Let me see. So, you got chemicals being sprayed in 22 million private gardens. That's pretty staggering, isn't it? Along the road verges, parks, other green spaces could slow insect decline by creating a network of nature-friendly habitats where insects can recover. But, out in Mother Nature, the species are also suffering the same fate, but it's not from pesticides, it's from emissions from the nuclear industry worldwide constantly into the environment. In a petition launched on Thursday, says the government followed examples of France, which banned the use of synthetic pesticides in public since 2017 and banned garden use from 2019. Well, they're too late, see? It's a desperate move. It's okay. It's a good thing to do. France is not known to do good things, so it's unusual. Catastrophic decline. So the heavy use of pesticides has been highlighted as a factor in the catastrophic decline of the world's insects. But it doesn't actually work like that because humans only reside on a small fraction of available land. And so when I do the research expeditions 400 kilometers away from communities and the species are wiped out, it's not because of insecticides, it's because of radioactive fallout. Insecticides don't create plumes that covers the planet and pulses energy at the speed of light every second. I'm just saying, right? But they're trying to blame pesticides in the communities for the decline of the species everywhere. And science actually doesn't work like that. And that's the Guardian for you, right? And the Irish Times, Michael Viney, our flying friends and foes do not seem as plentiful as before. In the heat wave, we left every window open at night to trap the slightest breeze, inviting all sorts of winged invasion, and nothing came in. The plague would seem to be vanishing along with the swallows that need them for foods. When the holiday friends from Belfast arrived, they once needed to wipe the windscreen clean of dead moths and other insects gathered on the way. Only once. Now, in a well-worn single of extinction, the wind has been swept too clean. Dead seabirds wash up in regional shores. Uptick in seabirds carcasses on beaches started last week, July 28. Different species of birds were washing up on the beaches in many different communities. A dead mer was reportedly found on the beach at Little blah blah blah. 15 dead birds on the 7.2-mile stretch of the West Beach. 1 horned puffin, 6 murres, 7 shearwaters, 1 kittiwake. Scientists are still scratching their heads as a mystery illness killing birds all over the U.S. And they're showing 2 cormorants. And they're kittiwakes or something, I'm not sure. Ill and dying birds in this summer, swollen, crusted over eyes, were the predominant symptoms in blue jays, robins, grackles, and we covered that earlier, right? I'm not going to go into the full dead birds showing up everywhere. After numerous illnesses and organisms have been ruled out, we still don't know what caused the epidemic, despite testing. Scientists call it a mortality event. Crusty eyes, blindness, frequently appeared on the ground, perplexed and wobbly heads, occasional sluggish or unresponsive, and it has researchers stumped. Yeah, it's called the Fukushima effect. Infectious disease found in Hawaii dolphins could spark mass marine mammal deaths. Now, they haven't followed through on this story, because we expected to see this disease now being used as the cover story for all the other species that are dying. It's a very disturbing story because this institution in Hawaii is notorious for lying. After 2 years, researchers discovered a novel strain, marine mammal disease responsible for deadly outbreaks among dolphins and whales worldwide. So they're talking worldwide, which is not just Hawaii, but we've never heard any follow-up on this story anywhere else. And we expect them to use that as the cover story for all the die-offs for the last decade. Threatening extinction to other Hawaiian species. So talking about jumping species. Part of the work of the Health and Stranding Lab. And they were set up by NOAA. And NOAA's unbelievable cover stories now for the nuclear industry. It's unbelievable how much they hate everybody at NOAA. At the Jersey Shore, experts are fishing for answers. Where are the stranded sea creatures? Because over the last decade, they're used to strandings. Now, all of a sudden, there's none left, no more strandings. They rescued 115 mammals of August of 15, down from the usual 150, 180 by that point in the year, he said. Why are things so slow? Could be the weather, could be food, could be a lot of things. Could be climate change. Of course, everybody's pre-programmed now to regurgitate the word climate change. Nobody even knows or is able to articulate what climate change is. Now, I'll tell you what climate change is. It's the radioactive fallout covering the entire planet, pulsing energy every second for millions of years. Nothing escapes it. Dead dolphin, dead whale, 62-foot fin whale, most likely been struck by a container ship. Yeah. And I guess that's what killed the 7,000 gray whales too, was it? Container ships? And not a dragger, not a freighter, not a coast guard, but a container ship. You can't tell, what killed. If a whale gets struck by a ship, you can't just say it's a container ship. It's absurd, right? Climate change. The harp seals have disappeared. Ocean warming has led to major shift in the fish species. The ocean warming is caused by Fukushima. As I showed you earlier, the cesium is dispersed from the surface to the ocean floor. 50 strong dolphin pod moving away from stranding danger. Is that the United Kingdom? I can't remember. Well, like I said, we can't go down too much details, but let's have a... Yeah, that's the United Kingdom somewhere. They're packed together like sardines. One was dead, yeah. Who knows? Dolphins rescued with help of the local community. I can't remember. After mass live stranding. 13 common dolphins were saved on Friday the 13th. Mainly mothers and calves with a large male stranded, and with the tide dropping. The tide was still dropping for over an hour. Decided to move the dolphin 24 kilometers by road to the slipway, where they could be more easily immersed and cared for. Most likely they'll die anyway. If they stranded, it's because their bodies are given out, because they breathe air, right? At Jersey Shore, experts are fishing for answers. Yeah. Collapse of seabed grass threatens survival. But it's not just down around Florida. This is symmetrical throughout the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. And then the research expeditions that I showed you earlier that I carried out, I was able to show in increments over a couple of years how all the algae was disappearing, and it had all kinds of dead spots on it. It was extraordinary. Because I used to be a commercial diver, so I used to work the kelp beds all the time. You have to work in areas with this huge amount of kelp. And I was doing 300 days a year, and I'd never seen that in kelps before of any species. There's over 700 algae in British Columbia. Survival, and so the seagrass beds, there's a lot of species live in that, right? And also over the last 48 months, many acres of the critical habitat have completely collapsed with not a single blade of grass left, because plants will bioaccumulate radiation until they die. And so I noticed that people last night had mentioned that my audio was a little bit low, and I don't know if I accidentally hit the button or something, but I turned it up another notch, and I hope that works out for everybody. I'll check after the show. Increase in green turtle strandings. In other areas around the world, climate change, right, which is, by the way, Fukushima followed. But you see this pre-programmed for the media just to keep regurgitating the same words over and over and over. Skinny orcas up to 3 times more likely to die than healthy whale. What? That's amazing. How did they ever figure that out? Let's just sit and think about that. And that's amazing how smart scientists actually are. What wonderful people they must be. Skinny orcas up to 3 times more likely to die than healthy orcas. It just boggles the mind that they figured that out. I think that's amazing. I think they should all get Nobel Prizes so we know who are the stupidest people on our planet. It's hard to believe that somebody said that, isn't it? Skinny, emaciated, southern resident killer whales are 2 to 3 times more likely to die than whales in healthy condition, and new research has shown. Whoever done the research should have to lose their degree and give back the money for the research, because you don't need the research to know that. How do you research that again, I wonder? Humpback whale deaths break Brazilian records, more than 130 so far in 2021. More than 100, broke all the records down there. Humpback whales, there's a mass mortality event for humpback whales. They're showing up emaciated all around the world. Something's killing gray whales, yeah, they're emaciated. all over the place. Scientists are worried 1,000 grey whales have died so far this year. Something is killing grey whales. It's called Fukushima radioactive fallout and it wrecked the entire food chain. Once again, I'm not trying to cover each individual stories, but nearly a quarter seemed atypically skinny. Really? Nearly a quarter. And what, the rest of them died from ship strikes? That narrative started in 2015 at the Paris Accord. They all got their marching orders at the same time. There's a lot more than a quarter, baby. We've been covering this since it started. Whale embryo washes ashore, possibly caught in a tropical storm, prematurely aborted the pregnancy. So first off, whales are designed, genetics superiorly selected to be in the ocean. Not just in nice days, but in stormy days too. You retard, I apologize for the terminology. Whoever wrote that should never, ever, under any circumstances, be allowed to write anything again, not even sign a check. Female whale possibly caught in a tropical storm. Great. That's why it aborted the baby. Of all the stupid shit that I read, that's way up there, baby. With the skinny whales are 2 to 3 times more likely to die. You kind of lose faith in journalism after you read this stuff. 6 orcas rescued from Argentine beach after getting stranded. 1 died. They became stranded. Well, like all species now are just randomly stranding. 150 people, volunteers from the area, as well as city workers, firefighters, marine biologists. Not for orca, not for humpback or grey whale or any other whale, but for orcas. Pulled 6 orcas to safety in a 6-hour rescue operation, and they did too. They rescued 5 of them, I think it was, which probably died and sank somewhere else, but still, that takes some serious courage, man, to pull that one off. Said it's unclear why the orcas beached themselves. Idiot said, the tourism secretary of all people said, the whales lost their orientation because they showed no sign of illness. They lost their orientation, so they all just ran up on the beach. I don't know where to. Let's run up on the beach till we work it out. Because we're stupid whales. Like if the whales, every whale that ever went somewhere didn't know where it was to, ran up on the beach, there'd be no whales left on the planet 1,000 years ago. Yes, light pollution from street lamps linked to insect loss. They're blaming it on pesticides, and they blame it for all the species missing worldwide. And now they're going to blame street lamps for all the insects missing across the United Kingdom in that story. Light pollution from street lamps, yeah, well, it will cause localized problems. I have no doubt about it. But my recollections was there was always a party around the light when it came to insects, right? Now there's no party around your lights or your back doors of insects. Scientists say light pollution is contributing to worrying decline in insects seen in recent decades. Well, we're talking about United Kingdom, so let's cover 4 or 5 of these studies. Stillbirths among offsprings of male radiation workers at Sellafield nuclear reprocessing plants. Assessment of routine atmospheric discharges from Sellafield nuclear installation, which used to be called Windscale, and they changed the name because when they had a meltdown there, which is still going on, 8 million litres a day going into the Atlantic Ocean, they went to the theaters and kidnapped people from the back rows of the theaters. Back in those days, in the 50s, right, there was the poor people sat in the back row. They didn't go to nuclear power plants, other nuclear power plants, and look for volunteers. They didn't call up the universities, ask for nuclear academic volunteers. They didn't call up the nuclear companies all over the place and look for nuclear volunteers. No, they got buses, the police did, went to the theaters, kidnapped people from the back rows of the theaters. They didn't go to fire departments and ask them to volunteer. They didn't ask police to volunteer. They kidnapped people from the back rows of the theaters in the United Kingdom and to go to Windscale. And then after, they changed the name to Sellafield to hide what they'd done. You tell me that's not a despicable, disgusting, pathetic industry. Plutonium was discharged from Sellafield, UK site since 1952. For 70 years they've been discharging it there. Plutonium, which is named after the devil, by the way. Unraveling 5 decades of man-made uranium-236 discharge from nuclear reprocessing plants like La Hague in France and give me a second here. The reprocessing plants just from La Hague in France and Donneray and Sellafield in the United Kingdom have contaminated the whole Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean and all countries in between. Assessment of prospective food chain doses from radioactive discharges. So why are you doing studies like that for? Because it's contaminated food. Then we got to pretend it's okay. Sorry to bug you, but insects are in decline. And I've done the research expeditions now for many years, and we count insects, and they've disappeared. No longer cleaning your windshields for most places. They're still out there, but we've seen an incredible, unbelievable decline. We hear the pollinators are in dire straits, while harmful invasive insects seem to be proliferating. And what goes on is some species are more vulnerable quicker than other species. But the feeder insects, which are the bugs, ones that like mosquitoes, there's all kinds of species eat mosquitoes. Like dragonflies will eat them, horseflies will actually eat them. All kinds of birds are eating them. So the mosquitoes are a very important one. Frogs eat them, fish eat them. And so because their natural predators gets wiped out, they proliferate, right? And there's no species to keep them in check. There's no birds to keep them in check, is what's going on there. And that's caused by radioactive fallout. Insect apocalypse, suffering steep declines globally in both diversities and abundance. And Shakespeare Bay is where the military done a whole bunch of uranium testing, munition testing there. And there's a nuclear power plant located on the western shores of Shakespeare Bay on top of that. So the first thing you got to do is look at the obvious suspects when it comes to any marine or insect or bird or animal die-off. Particularly if it's local, you got to look for nuclear power plants, nuclear dumps, nuclear waste sites, stuff like that. Radioactive releases from nuclear power plants to the Shakespeare Bay watershed. Fin whale that died suffer from underlying conditions. Yeah, it's emaciated. Look at it. And fin whales are generally fairly streamlined whales, but that one's emaciated. So the whale, a thin body and empty stomach, suggested it had been impaired and not eaten recently. Had significant parasite infection in liver, lungs, kidneys, and that the whale's thin body and empty stomach meant it was emaciated. Pod of orcas spotted in the harbor. That's big. So whenever these, like not a pod of whales or humpbacks or fin or pilot whales, but orcas. And this is a condition. This is the social engineering, right? What they call social engineering, where they put your life above everybody else's life, for instance, right? That justifies you sending the military in to kill all the children in the country, which is what the United Nations was trying to do to North Korea, obviously. And look, so you see the police, the Department of Conservation, the Coast Guard were all alerted. And the trust was keeping an eye on the orcas to make sure that they're safe. So the whales come in your community. Does that seem normal to anybody? There's whales in the harbour. Call the Coast Guard, call the police, get them all on an alert just in case. Like, what are you talking about? Pre-Fukushima, people are like, this is great, let's get some pictures. Now if they show up anywhere, you got to alert everybody just in case they all go up on the beach, because that's what their last 10 years have showed us. It's bizarre. That's a bizarre statement. The police, Department of Coast Conservation, and the Coast Guard were all alerted. That's the strangest statement I've ever heard, really. California mom saves his son, 5, from a mountain lion attack using her bare hands. Yeah, mama can lose all fear in a heartbeat. Used her bare hands to fight off a 65-pound mountain lion, which is usually, they can get up to a couple of 100 pounds, that was attacking her 5-year-old son. The animal attacked the boy while he was in the family front yard, leaving him with injuries to his head, neck, chest. And the mountain lion dragged him about 45 yards. Holy smokes, hey? It's like 150 feet. That's crazy. The boy's mother heard the commotion from inside the house, ran outside, started punching and striking the mountain lion with her bare hands and got him off the son. That's an incredible story. And we're seeing a lot of those types of stories. That's not normal, by the way. Once at the house, the officer discovered the mountain lion crouching in the bushes. They killed it right on the spot, of course. Tranquilized it. I'm sorry. Another appeared and was tranquilized. He shot the first one, tranquilized the second one. And away we go. Orca ushering attempt abandoned after 3 hours. So this is the strangest story again, is where orca came into a harbor and the local authorities went out there and tried to drive them away. Get out of here, you damn orca. I'd never heard nothing like it pre-Fukushima. I'd never seen or heard anything like these stories in my life. 4 boats manned by the Department of Conservation, Department of Idiots, Department of Morons, and Project Jonah. Project Jonah, which is a group set up because of strandings. They heard a pod of 7 orcas out of an inlet in Wellington have been abandoned. Is that New Zealand? You got to be some kind of stupid to do something like that. So whales come in your harbor and you go out and try to drive them out of there. That's it's the strangest reaction imaginable. It really is when you think about the history. Trying to herd whales to the opening and back out to sea. Because, you know, they're stupid, right? Whales are stupid, Dana. You're stupid. Orca remains in harbour north of Wellington. Police checkpoint halts rubberneckers. What do you think you're doing? Going down and looking at the whales. Scum. Like, this is ludicrousness. Rubberneckers. And insulting them too, right? With a slander, with a slur like that. They went down and took pictures and videos. As you can see, I got a video and they got pictures, right, of the whale. But you go down there, you're scum. It's unbelievable. The group had teams placed around the estuary, keeping an eye on the whales. It's like we lost the planet to morons and ninnies. Police use social media to warn people to stay away. You're not safe anywhere now. They show up in your Facebook. Norman Reedus says a Death Stranding sequel is already in negotiations. So Death Stranding, because I look up stranding all the time, right? Because there's stranding for seals and sea lions, whales. And so they put out this Japanese sack of shit put out a video game about whale strandings. And so half of the headlines I read, I go check out, is about a video game now. It's absolutely torture when you're trying to find whale strandings. And Japan is the king now of genocide and ecocide and omnicides. Far from the Olympic line, like the waves of Fukushima, are healing for local surfers. Like if you're surfing around Fukushima, you're actually a well-disciplined idiot. Bloodbath scene in Scotland. There's some whales wash up in Scotland, done the jiggy and died. These are Southerby beak whales, which eat squid, which are missing. I wonder the police didn't arrest them for getting that close. They're emaciated. One of them, the one we can see there, the full body, that's definitely emaciated. Southerby beak whales, they're deep water. You don't never see them along the coastline. Yeah, I'm just out there stood in a pool of blood. How you guys doing? Don't worry, I got a picture from my Twitter. The receiver of the wreck was notified, and the British Divers Marine Life Rescue. British Divers Marine Life Rescue? I can't stand them, eh? I've covered so many stories of these people. Nobody's allowed near the whale, only them. And the receiver of the wreck is the Queen of England. It's no longer Prince Philip because he died. Receivers of the wreck. Another southern resident killer whale is in trouble. Because they're better than you and me. Just a few weeks after the presumed death of the southern resident killer whale K21, another resident orca is emaciated also. They're dying because he refused to eat anything but chum salmon, is it? 2-year-old J-pod orca calf is emaciated. So all of the whales in Puget Sound are showing up emaciated. Once again, we're not going to try to cover the whole stories. Southern resident orca near Washington State presumed dead in the Straits of Juan de Fuca. That's where I used to live to. Can insects be potential food source in times of climate change? In times of climate change. Such a strange framing of that narrative to use it that way. So there's going to be no other food on the insects is what they're saying, see? No other options, just insects. Are the meal of the future, providing a nutritious and environmentally friendly option. Well, what's wrong with just a vegetarian meal? What are you going to have insects for? On the global fights, starvation and climate change. Whenever you read climate change in these kinds of stories, just run, man. Street lights, especially super bright LEDs, may harm insect populations. Well, localized within 50 feet or something, maybe. But my experience was that the insects love the lights at nighttime. Street lights could be, maybe, almost, possibly. Could be. UK Centre. If it's official from the United Kingdom, you might as well just stick a drill in your head. It'll make more sense than what they're going to tell you. Only 3% of the country lies under strong illumination for street lights. Habitat loss and climate change are more likely to blame than the lights. Well, climate change is radioactive fallout for 75 years. This one is from Fukushima, based on 20 days of radioactive fallout. If you let the model run for another 10 days, there'd be nothing to see, only red. Deadwood in the global carbon cycle. The importance of insects in decomposition of wood. Well, the most important part of the decomposition of wood is bacteria. If you don't got bacteria, the insects can't be there. Right? They need the bacteria just like the wood does. The speed at which deadwood decomposes in forests depends on the climate. If you got radioactive fallout, and you do, in that environment, it's pulsing energy every second, sterilizes the environment. And in increments over generations of the species, which could be like every 6 days or 6 weeks or 6 months for next generation, you'll see changes and discrepancies and abnormalities, malformations, of course, and you'll see incredible discrepancies in the sex ratios of males to females, more males than females, until eventually it's just males, which means no more babies, which means when they die off, that's the end of that species in that area or that continent or that planet, as well as fungi and insects. Now determined that the annual contribution made by deadwood to the global carbon cycle is about 50%, right? So the phytoplankton, which is the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain, it's the majority of it. And that's at the surface of the ocean, the phytoplankton. That gets wiped out by the radioactive fallout, because that's the first thing it's going to come in contact with in the ocean is the phytoplankton. And most of the whales are dependent upon the phytoplankton, and the majority of almost all the species are dependent upon the phytoplankton, because that's the basis of the food chain. Warming waters have driven whales to the area where they're more vulnerable to vessel strikes and entanglement. More vulnerable to vessel strikes and entanglement. Again, this is there is examples recently of whales here in the St. Lawrence that shouldn't be there, and they feed on plankton. It's the right whale, I think, if I remember correctly. And they're filter feeders, plankton feeders, right? And their normal habitat they've been doing for hundreds of thousands of years, they've now ended up in the St. Lawrence. And there's a lot of die-offs also in the St. Lawrence of those whales. Climate change. And so climate change is the garbage can diagnosis and warming ocean temperatures. Well, that's caused by radioactive fallout. So the radiation covers the planet in radioactive fallout, and then by proxy, the ocean becomes completely contaminated. And it's also running, hemorrhaging straight into the ocean. North Atlantic right whales are smaller than they were pre-Fukushima. Ocean regime shifted, driving the collapse of the North Atlantic right whale population. I can't remember what that study was. Even marine species that are less sensitive to temperatures may still be forced to migrate in pursuit of their prey. Well, a lot of preys, like, they're not going to be... They disappeared. They didn't go somewhere else. They actually just disappeared. 25-meter endangered blue whale, a 75-foot whale, 75 feet. Blue whale washes ashore on the beach south of Halifax. Mars' response specialists say there are no signs of external injuries on the whale's bodies. He said this is the third blue whale to wash up Nova Scotia shores in the last 4 years, which never washed up pre-Fukushima, to my knowledge. Major risk factors for the species include dwindling food supply, starvation, and severe weather. First off, the weather doesn't hurt the animals in the ocean, like thousands and thousands and thousands of hours under the ocean working. And once you get down below the height of the wave, it's always the same. It never changes. It's perfectly flat calm down there. Once if you got a 10-foot wave, you get 10 feet under the ocean, it's going to be completely flat calm. So if you got a flat calm day on the ocean, as soon as you get below the surface, it's going to be flat calm. If you got a 1 foot wave and you get 1 foot under the ocean, it's flat calm. And claiming that whales can't handle storms in the ocean is absurd. These are absurd conjectures, opinions. That whale is emaciated. And they brought out all the local idiots and morons. Dead humpback whale washes ashore, cause of death unknown. And again, you kind of got to do a double take. Ship strike, was it the environment, loose piece of fisherman's net? We humans tend to wonder or even assume that somehow we might be to blame, you sack of doo-doo. Scientists have no evidence that those might have been the cause of death, by the way, so why open your pie hole and say it? This was the first dead humpback in the region since January. We have seen 15 dead grey whales, a pygmy sperm whale. 4 died from ship strikes, and the rest of those whales' deaths were undetermined. It's disgusting to say stuff like that, by the way, because that only showed up since the Paris Accord in 2015. They never mentioned the word ship strike pre-Paris Accord. 15 dead grey whales. Yeah, there's 7,000 since 2016. They were all emaciated. Some of them were emaciated and hit by a ship because they can't get out of the way when you're dead. Warm in Atlantic Ocean, but it's absurd to suggest that a whale doesn't get out of the way. Warming Atlantic Ocean drives right whales toward... They can actually hear each other 150 miles away. You really think they can't hear a ship coming at them? You're an idiot if you do. Warming Atlantic Ocean drives right whales towards extinctions. And so now they're saying the whales are headed for extinctions because of the warm ocean. But the warm ocean is caused by the radioactive fallout from Fukushima, right? That's the Atlantic Ocean right here. Buried, constant, perpetual radioactive fallout. I showed all that. I laid down the whole foundation for this video at the beginning. It's a long process. It drives me nuts because it's nice just to come out and run through the headlines and then go pass out because that's what I really want to do. It's been a shitty day for me. Warming Atlantic Ocean drives right whales towards extinction. But this is an important story, and there's no shortcuts when you're talking about this subject, unfortunately. What's the point of doing it if you're not going to do the work, right? Feeling miserable or sick is not an excuse not to do the work for me. Warming oceans have driven a critically endangered North Atlantic right whale population from its traditional protected habitat to exposing to more lethal ship strikes. So they're preconditioned to regurgitate this narrative since 2015, we notice. Disastrous commercial fishing entanglements, blah, blah, blah. So everything is your fault. There's no other... It's not the nuclear industry, right? And so like BP Oil had ran a public relation campaign when it had a major oil spill in early 2000, where it blamed you. That's where we got the word carbon footprint came from, was a advertisement campaign by an oil company who had a disastrous oil spill and decided to blame the oil spill on you, not on BP. And it was successful, and now everybody's talking about carbon footprint, but nobody knows where it came from. It actually came from BP Oil. It was an advertisement campaign meant to demonize you instead of you demonizing them, and it worked really well too. It is coming from invading slope water hundreds of feet below the ocean surface, forcing the right whales to abandon their traditional habitat. The ocean is a very complex creature, by the way. And so when you see stories like this, where they're making these types of assertion, run, baby. And you can connect it back, by the way, because I don't want to go into great details on each story. Some of these could be 20 or 30 clicks. Funding for the research was provided by the Lenfest Ocean Programming. So who are the Lenfest? A grant-making program that funds scientific research on policy-relevant topics. Policy-relevant topics concerning the world's oceans, communicates the results of the supported research decision makers to decision makers. Researchers stay focused on policy-relevant questions and approaches and can adjust to any shifts in policy landscapes. And congruently, decision makers are able to respond to their version of scientific results as they emerge. Through the work, become internationally recognized leaders in a range of practices, enhances the usability, relevance, and dissemination of propaganda. And if you go over to the YouTube site, it was created amazingly on February 10th, 2011. And they got 168 subscribers in all that time. They posted they're posting videos regularly. So it raises the question of who are they actually? They're obviously a lobbying group, is who they really are. And the findings, whales have been moving from the Bay of Fundy to the Gulf of St. Lawrence on the hunt for their food. So where did the food go is the big question. It didn't go all the way down there. It was always down there. They just happened to find it there. But the way they frame the narrative as if the food has also shifted there, which is simply not true. For hundreds of years, and just in the last few years, the water temperature rose so much that the copepods weren't being produced like they should have been. That's exactly my point was. They were extinct, and the whales luckily found some off Newfoundland in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which goes up the interior to Canada, right towards Montreal. Entanglements and ship strikes and Noah, scumbag Noah. You're a scumbag Noah. If you're watching this, you're a bunch of scumbags. So once you go from there, we need the herring, we need the krill, and blah, 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 blah. So it's not just plankton eaters, it's all species. The Nome Nugget, Alaska's oldest newspaper. St. Lawrence Island, home to 2 native villages in the region, is also the summer homes of several migratory seabird species, kittiwakes, Cassini auklets, common murres, shearwaters. And over the last several years, though, the bird colonies on the islands have been shrinking, and no one has been able to determine why. They're literally seeing fewer birds on the cliff, and they're watching the birds fade away each year. Alaska Sea Grant Marine Advisory Program agent Gary Sheffield. Alaska Sea Grant Marine Advisory Program agent. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm just the Alaska Sea Grant Maritime or Marine Advisory Program agent. It's just absurd. Based in a university in Nome. Starting in 2017, the northern Bering Seas have been experiencing Seabird Die-Offs. It actually started long before that, 2014. Multi-species adults have been washing in dead, and that includes a variety of different types of birds. Shearwaters, murres, puffins, gulls, kittiwakes, cormorants, loons. Washing up dead is not normal. It's not normal. In addition, local subsistence hunters and beachgoers are finding dead birds in regional shores. The National Park Service's die-offs of birds, bird wrecks. 100 dead birds every 4 kilometers. Wow. These are absurd numbers. Speculating disease, toxic algae blooms, and food source scarcities, which is emaciation. And there's so many parts of that story. Unfortunately, we're just trying to to raise awareness. We're not trying to go into great detail. Black vulture attacks on animals may be increasing. There's a lot of controversy about this story. Farmers tell of ferocious attacks on the animals. Large black birds feasting on newborn calves as they emerge from their mothers, preying on the mothers sometimes themselves. In the last couple of years, they got really aggressive. So there's a whole lot of, unless the birds are picking the rubber off a car, bastards. These purple urchin slayers are trying to save the Pacific kelp forest. So this story again is look over here, don't look over there type story, where they're claiming that if the purple kelps are eating all, or purple urchins, sea urchins, are eating all the kelps. There's actually 1,000 times more red sea urchins than there is of the purples there. And this is normal because kelp normally washes along and just gets stuck on their spine, right? And then the other ones crawl on it and munch on it. It takes a long time. But it's not unusual to see 20, 30, 40 of them, reds and purples, crawling up the stalk of the Joint Pacific kelp, for instance, and dragging it down so more urchins will climb on it and start chomping at it, right? But what the story they're telling doesn't match up, because I used to pick 5,000 urchins a day. So I lived in that environment for year after year after year after year after year on both oceans. And the red urchins which dwell in undersea kelp forests has gotten harder to find in recent years. No. You can't have one disappear, one species. They all eat the exact same food. Gone is much of the kelp, the dense autumn-tone canopies of seaweed that provide a food, shelter, safe havens, hundreds of marine species, from sea otters to abalones to rockfish to brittle stars. Right, and there's a whole ecosystem in the kelp forest. I used to get caught up in the kelp forest sometimes. I tell you how bad, but how useful. I used to always carry a knife to cut myself out of the kelp forest when I get tangled. It's literally the exact same as being caught in a spider web. It's exactly the same thing. All your limbs are tied up, and kelp is really strong, but it's very brittle if you got a knife, right? And lost my knife one day, which wasn't unusual. And I ended up taking I was wearing a full face, a Pegasus full face mask. It's because I was using dry suits, right? And so what I used to have to do is take the full face off, grab the kelp and chew it till I got an arm free, and chew the kelp off, put the face mask on, purge it, get some air in my lungs again, take a big deep breath, take the face mask off, then pull the kelp around my leg up and chew on that till I got through that. Now, if I was on the ocean floor, typically you can pick up like a clam shell, an oyster shell, a scallop shell, a geoduck shell, or whatever, and cut the kelp with that, right? But a lot of the times when you're transitioning is when you would get caught up. And for years I used to dive on a hookah system, which is you take 300 or 400 or 500 feet of ear hose with you, and so that would get wrapped up in the kelp. It would be absolute torture. I don't miss those days at all, but I do. I miss the scenery. So this whole story, anyway, is simply not. You're not going to save the kelp by killing the urchins that are left. It doesn't work that way. It's symmetrical throughout the whole coastline that the kelp is dying, all 700 species. And I know because I was an ex-diver, but I also done the research year after year after year of the species. And that included the kelp. And so normally when you go into the kelp forest, because I used to use a little small speedboat, a little small Zodiac. And originally the little motor would stall in heavy kelp, right? But after a couple of years, it didn't stall. It would just chop it up like toilet paper until there was finally, the last year, there was no more. For the whole coast, and I went in the Native communities and talked to them. I used to always ask them about rare cancers in their community. And they say once or twice every week somebody dies of a rare cancer in their community. In the last couple of years, it's just an extinction event for them. 4 years ago, manatees were declared no longer endangered. Now they're dying at a record pace because they're dependent upon the seagrass. And the seagrass has not disappeared just where they're to, it's disappeared along the entire continental shelf. I must admit that point to a global decline in seagrass ecosystem, which a lot of the media is trying to paint it as a localized problem, but it's not. It's a global die-off, and that's a prime picture there, where you can see the different colors. You can see the grass is not healthy. That's not a healthy ecosystem. But what we were and documented, I put up on my website, the Nuclear Proctologist, you would see these white spots on them. These were dead zones. In Shakespeare Bay, the largest estuary in the U.S., where they used to do live depleted uranium munition testing from the military there. OSU scientists say ocean oxygen levels too low too early. So if you kill off the phytoplankton, then that's what makes the oxygen in the ocean, is the phytoplankton. And it's liberated by the waves crashing onto the rocks. There's other ways, but that's one of the major ways oxygen is liberated into the environment. Scientists at Oregon State University are troubled by the levels of hypoxia off the Pacific coastline, northwest coastline. Lack of oxygen due to the extinction of the phytoplankton. Amid an unprecedented collapse in Alaska Yukon River salmon, no one can say for certain why there are so few fish. Well, what's going on is there's this weird phenomenon we notice on the research expeditions along the coastline, which you can see the Rocky Mountains in the background. And even in summertime, the Rocky Mountains have huge ice packs. It completely disappeared by around 2017. I was reporting on it with the documentation because I was doing the whole coastline for 3 to 4 months at a time, right, without coming home. And what we noticed was that the glaciers were completely gone. And what the glacier does is each summer it's going to release cold water, clean water, that'll come down through all the rivers and lakes and streams and estuaries all the way to the coastline. And it regulates the temperature through all the streams and rivers and estuaries and little creeks and everything, and even the coastline with this cold water. But when the ice pack disappeared because the radioactive fallout from Japan doesn't allow the ice to crystallize. So the radiation covers the whole coastline, all the Rocky Mountains. So the big clouds are coming in all the time also from the ocean. They hit the Rocky Mountains, they lose a lot of their payloads, and then they go over the Rocky Mountains, right? And so it's losing a lot of radiation at that stage, not all of it by any shape or form. And obviously a lot of radioactive fallout is not dependent upon the clouds also coming in. But that's typically how the glaciers replenish themselves. Was the ocean makes tens of thousands of miles of rain clouds that comes in and hits the Rocky Mountain and, say, turns into snow or something, right? But the radiation, you get radioactive snow. But in the summertime, it didn't allow the ice to crystallize, is the theory. The lone coho was the only fish to turn up in Alaska Department of Fish and Game's test net in August. The technician stooped low in her gloves and sandals for measurements. And so what happened was that cold water that would normally regulate all the rivers and lakes and streams and estuaries and everything else didn't come down. So now the streams are really low during droughts, and the fish can't make it back up the river to lay their eggs. But all the insects that were dependent upon the temperatures being regulated, all the small fry, all the toads, all the little fish, and all the ecosystem dependent upon those species, failed because you didn't have the cold water coming from the Rocky Mountains, right, going down to the Pacific Northwest coastlines. That's why you see the die-offs, and so there's no oxygen on top of that. Ocean hypoxia could cause massive dead zones off the coast. Now, the nuclear industry used to drive around for decades throwing 45-gallon drums off their ships all day long, just driving along, throwing them everywhere. They're all dead zones. Dead miles, dead 1,000 square miles, you name it. And if the drums didn't sink, they would shoot them. And on top of that, as the drum falls down to the ocean, every 33 feet, it's got an extra 14.3 pounds per square inch applied to it. So if it sinks to 500 feet, it's going to collapse the drum. It's completely now into the environment immediately. It's not going to take a year or 5 years or 10 years for the drum to start breaking down, blah, 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 blah. It's immediate. And Britain and American, their legacy is just brutal. It's brutal, dumping nuclear waste out in the ocean. It's brutal. What the United Kingdom done is revolting. For 3 decades, they had freighters specially designed just to go out, and they keep steaming along at 3 or 4 or 5 miles per hour, just dumping drums off the side of it all day, every day, for decades. It's revolting. And they knew long term what this was going to do, but they knew you didn't know any better at that time, and they took advantage of that, the nuclear industry did. Which is another reason that we got a poll tonight. Should the nuclear industry be banned, considering Fukushima radioactive fallout worldwide and the mass die-offs? And so this is a prime example. After 19 days, it covers the planet in an endless, continuous plume of radiation that'll pulse energy till the very end of time, heating up the planet and killing all the species. Florida wild coral rescued from disease spent a year in Orlando gaining health. It was a really interesting story. They saved I can't remember, it was a lot of samples, 2,000 species of coral, and they brought it ashore and started raising it till it was healthy, and then they were planning going back introducing it into the ocean. The only problem it is, you saved it because it was a radioactive ocean, and you still have a radioactive ocean. So when you put it back out there, it'll die. They got the breeding program. The only problem is you don't got an ocean to put it back into that can sustain life, right? That's the problem. It's a pretty amazing story, really, that they went, and pretty desperate, that they went out and rescued 2,000 different corals and started breeding it with the hopes of going out and reseeding the coastline. A nuclear engineer said, I agree, Fukushima can be an extinction event. I agree, Fukushima, and it does that by the radioactive fallout. It's not a game we're talking about tonight, folks. For those who aren't initiated, go back and watch the beginning of the video if you're still confused. Because I'm not, and I explain it all as the video progresses at the beginning of it, right? Now you see all the reactors at the beginning of it, explain all the reactors to you, explain the amount of radiation, why it's an issue, etc., etc. I give you the whole inside scoop. I bring you through academic studies after academic studies, and I explain to you why they're so significant and how they add into the big picture, and provide endless amount of documentation to back up any of my assertions. I walk you through the die-offs and why, and the precedents, and how we see this progress over a number of years, and and the common denominators. I take you through the mass die-offs to introduce you to the mortality events. There's not just one species, it's all the species. I went through a lot of work today. I'm tired. I'm going to call it a night. And I'm going to go out there and get a cup of tea. And I've done the show early tonight because I got to do another episode after this for the coronavirus. I'm redoing the coronavirus. We had 59 episodes, and so I'm redoing that. And I'll take a break for a little bit, and I'll sit there and get the show ready tomorrow morning. I'll record it and hopefully post it tomorrow at my other site. While you're at it, don't eat food from Japan. Don't feed it to your kids and your loved ones. Don't buy nothing from Japan. Japan's a scumbag. We say goodnight to everybody. And we're going to close the poll down. Don't forget that. Let's check the poll out one more time. Should the nuclear industry be banned? Yes. We got 53 votes, which is awesome. 100%, which is appropriate. So we're going to end the poll here in a moment. I'll do a quick shout out to everybody that happened to make it to the stream. Those videos are up at BitChute, Dana Durnford on BitChute. The first episode is up there, done really bad. No big surprise, I'm censored. Good day, Peaceware, Dana Nasana, thank you again. Colette, hi Colette. Albert, James Lucid, hi James. I only serve one king. Hi Laurie. I don't expect too many people to find me because I've done an early show. I got a lot of work to do tonight, and I got to get up tomorrow morning and record it, hopefully. Ella, Soul Jacket, Ease. Good night, everybody. Port Angeles, Tim Norris donated $16 last night. There's links below the video to anybody who wants to donate to help with the expenses, and we're just never going to get out of the hole at this rate. The work got to get done regardless. Cough mixture, Anna C. Good night, everybody. V-bar, Y-bar. Yeah, UME is an unusual mortality event for people not familiar. John Curtis. One Sky. Human Love, Solidarity. Dave Holly, UK. John 2H. John 2H. I'm just scrolling through the names quickly before we call it night. Nancy Sands. H9000. Hi, everybody. I was surprised. A lot more people found me early than I thought. Ocean Man. Good night, everybody. Coming on to the recent comments here, and we'll close it down. Yeah, good night, everyone. Looks like I got most people. If I forgot anybody, I will read your comment later. Because I scroll pretty quick. That usually happens. I seem to always miss one or two people. Never the same in two different shows, but I always seem to miss one or two people. And I always try to be. So good night to everybody that's watching this in the background. Watching this tonight, tomorrow, and the next day. I'm not lying to you. I'm not misrepresenting or leaving stuff out. I'm not fabricating anything. I provide you with all the documents for my assertions from the very beginning of the show to the very end of the show. And it's in your best interest to, if only 1/100 of the stuff I showed you tonight is true, we're in a world of hurt. Oldie a cat, yeah. Good night, everybody. I guess that's the end of it. Always takes me a minute or two just to like come to a stop. It's like being on the ocean for 30 days or 100 days. When you come ashore, you're still rocking. And when these shows are over, my brain's still going, oh crap, got a lot of work to do yet. You can't do what I'm doing anyway unless you do it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That's the only way you can possibly do what I'm doing. You got to be dedicated. Good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody tomorrow night, hopefully, same time, the normal time. And it's just because these shows are just so much work. When you finally put it together, everything is fresh in your mind. It's best to sit there and do the show. If you wait a few hours, it's a lot harder. Thanks for everybody. God bless. Take care, folks.